dead, right? I mean, Halloween is past. Now we're on the date, November 1st, the souls, Day of the Dead. This is a celebration in many cultures, right? Parade around with your skeletons. This is a scary day. And I was on an airplane most of Halloween when, when the ghosts and the goblins were out. I guess the witches were flying. The good witches were flying the airplane. We got through okay, but it was early in the morning. Welcome to Emil Amok's Takeout, my takes on all things considerable. You may have seen us on I was doing it from another method, doing the show, so we were out and about, and it may have been kind of glitchy. Oh, Emil, you're always glitchy. Okay, maybe, but it was news that I could do it from wherever remotely. So you might see us do that more often. It was kind of fun on the run, but it wasn't like I had a real dedicated workspace or anything like that. But we were also trying to have one eye on life and one eye on the affirmative action hearing at the Supreme Court. So we'll talk about all that today on this show. Welcome to it. It is November 1st, and yeah, did you go out on Halloween? Do you get dressed? I mean, I saw some people dressed up. I saw the TSA people dress up a little bit, put makeup on or have wings on, I guess improve how they're perceived. Oh, the angelic TSA. They were not angelic. And I guess if you get a flood of people, I understand. I have a lot of Filipino relatives who were TSA folks. A lot of Filipinos are TSA people. A lot of people who, people of color. And they have attitudes because they've seen it all. So I went through the ringer there yesterday. They found something in my bag that might have looked like some kind of weaponry. And all it was a kind of weird lock. They thought, oh, well, what could this be, this metal thing? Because it doesn't really show up on the x-ray machine, right? Anyway, so I'm here with you. Welcome to the program. I went back east because I'll say the cover story. The cover story was to be autumnal, was to wear my orange fleece and to see the leaves. My God, the leaves are beautiful. I got lost in the forest with my family, and we just walked up, trudged up, crunch, crunch, crunch on the leaves, seeing photosynthesis. It was great just to kind of get lost. But there was all this stuff happening in the world, which was worth commenting on. Not the least of which is the Paul Pelosi situation. I'm leaving the West Coast, heading to the East Coast, and there in San Francisco, Paul Pelosi is in his bedroom. His house is broken into. Fortunately, Speaker Pelosi wasn't there. But my God, this was January 6th coming to your doorstep. If you're one of the principals, I mean, what the January 6th folks did not do on that dreaded day at the Capitol, there's no reason to think that they wouldn't do personally or individually to the people they targeted. And here it was. All it takes is one. And make no mistake about it, we're talking about political violence. This is a mini January 6th individualized, taken to the home front. And shame on the Republicans who have not yet spoken out about it. Because this is the kind of thing that I hope makes you realize how serious this next election, November 8th, we're like a week away from it. Need I say, I've been saying this every show that we do, that if you have not registered to vote yet, like if you're in California, where I am, and you haven't registered to vote, somehow you've like let it slip your mind, you can still register to vote. You'd be a provisional ballot, but it would still count, and you can have your voice be counted. It'll count after all the votes are counted, then they'll go to the provisionals. But you will be able to participate. You will be able to participate in our democracy. So do it. Go to the California Secretary of State website and find out more if you are in California. If you're anywhere else, contact your Secretary of State. I'm sure there may be provisions for provisional ballots if you miss the deadline. Don't let them tell you that you cannot vote. But we're serious now. I mean, we're a week away. And when I was in New York yesterday, I was trying to take a ferry somewhere, and they shut down the ferries. All the boats on the water were shut down as the president came in. Biden came in to attend the funeral of Anthony Blinken's father up at the Met. And so it kind of wreaked havoc with my plans. So I ended up sitting in front of a television watching part of, or listening to part of, the hearings yesterday. But Biden is out and about today in all sorts of battleground areas where the Democrats have to hold on. I mean, if you want democracy as we know it in the ideal sense, then I think you're going to be voting one way in particular, and you're going to have to vote for the retention of the Democrats. I mean, that's, I think even if you're a Republican, I think you're going to have to vote for the retention of the Democrats. If you are an Asian American who is leaning a Republican, you have to admit, I mean, take the lead of Elaine Chao, married to Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader. Elaine Chao, you will recall, was the first person to leave the Trump administration right after January 6th because she knew this was not a good sign for our democracy, to her credit. And so if you're an Asian American Republican, I think unless you hear a Republican say they believe that the election wasn't stolen, that Joe Biden is the legitimate president, that's the litmus test. If you hear someone say, yeah, Biden was elected fairly, squarely, 2020, great, that's a Republican you can vote for. However, if you have some Republican you're thinking of voting for who is on the fence somehow and saying, I'm not sure if Biden really won, that person you should push aside. That person, he or she, is not worthy of your vote. And there are a large number of Republicans like that. That's the basic thing you need to do. If you're a Republican, look, Democrats know who to vote for. But if you're a Republican, that's how you determine if you're voting for a legitimate Republican. Just telling you. And what convinced me was this Pelosi situation. Paul Pelosi's recovering from the fractured skull after the man who broke into their home, right? Clobbered Pelosi with a hammer. And you've seen the details, right? I mean, the details are pretty sickening. He had zip ties. He was going to take out Nancy Pelosi's kneecaps. He was going to kidnap her and then have her wheelchaired into the floor of the house as an example. This is what's going to happen. This is pure intimidation. And you have Republicans cracking jokes. You have Republicans like Tom Cotton appearing on Tom Cotton of Georgia. He wanted to be the next Trump. I don't know if he's diabolical enough, but he's diabolical enough to appear on talk shows and to make fun of this situation. Every Republican has to condemn what happened to Paul Pelosi. Every Republican. And you're not hearing that. You're not hearing that from Republican leadership. It's sickening. But that is the reason why we are in trouble with this democracy. And that's why I set out that litmus test. If you're a Republican listening, or if you know a Republican, you can't vote for another Republican unless they answer that question. Do you believe that Joe Biden is a legitimately elected president of the United States? If they say no, you can't vote for them. You cannot vote for them. You got to vote Democrat. Election deniers, they are behind January 6th. Election deniers, that strain of political thought, that political rhetoric is what drove the attacker of Paul Pelosi. We cannot have that. We just cannot have that. We just cannot have that in our democracy. If you truly want to save democracy, we can't have that. We can't have that. So that happened as I was about to go into the forest. That bit of breaking news, and I was just shocked by it. I mean, I'm not necessarily a Paul Pelosi fan, but he's married, right? He's married to the speaker. I'm a fan of the speaker to a degree. I admire some things that she's done, not everything. I wish she, for example, I'll just tell you a personal example on the Filipino veterans. I wish she had pushed more aggressively, sooner, faster. She didn't. But ultimately, the right thing happened. Filipino veterans of World War II got equity. Pelosi was kind of slowed that down a little bit and sped it up. And ultimately in 2009, it was Obama who got the funding for that. So but like I said, the attack is really, it's surprising. David DePape, right? The suspect, he's headed to transfer to county jail in San Francisco. He told police that he was out there, he was follower of political conspiracy theories, including that false claim that the 2020 election was stolen. So he's facing 5 separate felony charges. And I think, make no mistake, it was a politically motivated act. In the same way that an assassination attempt is not a random attack, political motivated attack. So here's some things. We told you about the zip ties, right? DePop had zip ties, he had tape, he had rope, and at least one hammer. You look at the details about what DePop was up to when DePop learned that the speaker wasn't home. He said he would sit and wait for her to arrive. That's how serious this guy was. He was just going to camp out in the Pelosi home. And then Pelosi was able to call 911 from a bathroom, apparently. And DePop said he did not leave after Pelosi called 911 because he felt that much like the American founding fathers with the British. He was fighting against tyranny without the option of surrender. That was his view. Boy, this idea that he wanted to break Pelosi's kneecaps. So anyway, I got the basic word about the attack when I was about to go up in the hills in New York and see the foliage. It's a nice time, you get the colors. But then I was able to forget about it all and get away and be with my family, and that was great. And then I came back Monday, back to reality with the Supreme Court. And if you saw my column on theinquirer.net, this is a tricky story because I don't know how anyone can really understand how the justices would vote after watching the hearings. I mean, you would think that they were going to be fair. You would think they were asking information. They weren't showing hostility, although there was some hostility. There was also an attempt on the part of the liberals, and I said this on the live stream yesterday, although it may not have been, like I said, I don't know if my Wi-Fi was good from where I was. So it may not have been clear, but I would hope that just the justices, when they ask their questions, they're asking for information. They're not necessarily tipping their hand. I know in the past when people would ask questions, sometimes it would be an attempt to throw people off so that they wouldn't know. But I think it's fairly clear now. The only thing changed in this case now, and all the other cases where affirmative action has been attacked, is the makeup of the court. And the makeup of the court this time around is decidedly conservative. And if you were going to look at, say, what actions this very court has taken just within the last year, and you see that this is the court that ruled on the Dobbs case, that overturned Roe v. Wade, that ended abortion, which had been seen as a long-held precedent. They kicked it aside, and just on that, you would think, well, the likelihood of kicking aside affirmative action after decades, probably very good. But I want to hold out some hope. I don't want to. That was me before the hearing. Before that, I was already thinking that maybe it was lost. But maybe it wasn't. I mean, I heard Sotomayor and Kagan, Justices Kagan and Sotomayor, and the new justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson. I heard them ask questions that really took apart. First, the UNC. Ketanji Brown Jackson was asking about where's the harm here? Where's the harm in the way that race is used at the University of North Carolina? And of course, the lawyer representing the plaintiffs that want to do away with affirmative action didn't really provide a great answer. And this is one thing from the coverage. Based on who you read and what you read, you'll hear a perspective that shows, oh, the justices are hell-bent on ending affirmative action. But you won't hear about Ketanji Brown Jackson kind of exposing how in the UNC case, when asked about where's the harm, there was nothing conclusive about that anyone was harmed. In fact, I have to say that there was a bit toward the end in the UNC part where it was agreed that, well, everyone gets a boost, even white people. So how discriminatory was it in the UNC case? So I thought there was some points there. If people were looking and scoring it for, hey, who was poking holes in the arguments? Who was poking holes in the arguments during the hearing? I thought the liberals did very well to go after, in the UNC case. I didn't think the conservatives were trying to make their side look best, so they would throw up the softballs. I think in the end, on the UNC side, that it looked more optimistic than what you'd hear from anyone else or from other news sources, because the headlines were pretty grim, saying court seems open to ending affirmative. Yeah, they do. They're asking questions. They didn't say anything. But here's where it comes down to maybe they were leaning against affirmative action. Look, there's 6 conservative judges. You got three liberal justices and 6 conservative ones. So of course there's going to be a tilt. I thought that some of the questions asked by the conservative justices, I mean, it's funny because they really seemed to lock in on that 2003 quote in the Grutter versus Bollinger case by Sandra Day O'Connor, saying, hey, this 25-year time horizon, it was like a ghost hanging over affirmative action, as if could be an expiration date. Amy Coney Barrett asked Ryan Park, Solicitor General for the state of North Carolina, when does it end? When is your sunset? Like, there has to be a sunset? I guess there could be. But O'Connor didn't formally put a sunset on this law. She just said, where are we going to be? And this is why, I said in previous columns writing about this case that Sandra Day O'Connor was a conservative who actually had a soft spot soft spot in her heart for affirmative action when she said that 25 years from now, the use of racial preferences will no longer be necessary to further the interests approved today. That was her expectation. Well, what if it isn't? Do we just end it before it's done? And does that not appeal to a certain sense of justice, a certain conscience level where people say, yeah, we got to complete the mission. Previous courts pointed us in this direction, and we're not going to end till it's done. Am I being naive there? I mean, like I said yesterday, it's like, you've got the hose on the fire, but if you're saying, okay, in 25 years we're going to like stop hosing down the fire, we're going to roll up our hoses and go away. Fire's still raging. That doesn't sound like justice. But that seems like where the court is heading, which makes me think that maybe what they'll do is not, I mean, if you're thinking about how court decisions usually go, they don't go black-white. They usually go find that middle ground. And maybe the middle ground here is not done yet. We'll narrow the scope even further, but we'll leave affirmative action in place, but with an even narrower scope. And maybe we'll sunset it. Maybe that's what they'll do. Thinking out loud here now, because I think the problem is these conservatives are rabid conservatives. These conservatives are, except for cases of religion, I mean, that's where they're most rabid, right? Coney Barrett, Kavanaugh. They ask those questions. Race, they don't care too much about race, but religion, because, this is the court which wants to empower a theocracy here in America, apparently. Forget about the First Amendment, because First Amendment, that would be antithetical to a theocracy. Theocracy, we know there's only one religion, and the court's going to back that. I mean, look how many times the justices raised, what about religious diversity? That came up a number of times. So I see overall that Sandra Day O'Connor quote, the fact that it was raised so much during this 5-hour hearing, I think they're going, I think they're going to use it, even though U.S. Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar said she's not sure that O'Connor meant there's some kind of expiration date. Here's her quote. She said to the justices, "I just don't think it's a tenable way to read Grutter to say that the court was suggesting that 25 years from now, poof, the interest in diversity in higher education is no longer compelling." And I think that's kind of the way a sane person would look at this. Well, we're talking about justices who have this conservative bent. And we have a precedent with abortion and Roe. They will probably look, could you kick this back? You say affirmative action, leave it up to the states, the same way that this court viewed abortion. Federally, we won't allow it, but if the states want it, and there are examples, California, for example, does not have affirmative action. which makes it harder to have diverse student bodies at our great public institutions, higher institutions of learning. Look at Cal. But I mean, at Cal, you got 40% Asian American, but the Black and the Latino numbers, diversity has been much harder. So maybe that will be a way that the Supreme Court will kind of kick it back and say, okay, let the states deal with it. So here's a quote from Ketanji Brown Jackson. She asked whether barring race-conscious admissions programs could pose a different kind of legal problem. She says, quote, "What I'm worried about is that the rule you're advocating, that in the context of a holistic review process, a university can take into account and value all of the other background and personal characteristics of other applicants, but they can't value race. That seems to me to have the potential of causing more of an equal protection problem than it's actually solving," which is true. You're saying that you're going to allow everything else to be considered in their background, but not race, which is something that you got to wonder, because and here's another basic thing. If the people who are against affirmative action are trying to say you cannot use race because that's unconstitutional, well, the Constitution uses race. It's not colorblind. It wasn't colorblind when it ended slavery. So how do you make it consistent? How do you make race blind or race neutral? How do you make race neutral policies consistent with a Constitution that was not race neutral to begin with? So, but now getting back to Ketanji Brown Jackson's question, she said, and this came up in the University of North Carolina part, the first couple hours of the hearings. She said, suppose there are two applicants to UNC, the first of whom conveys their hope of becoming a fifth generation graduate of UNC, a legacy. The second explains that they're descended from enslaved people who didn't have a chance to attend the university. Both wish to honor their families' legacies by enrolling at UNC. Jackson said, now, as I understand your no race conscious admissions rule, these two applicants would have a dramatically different opportunity to tell their family stories and to have them count. The first applicant would be able to have his family background considered and valued by the institution as part of its consideration of whether or not to admit him, while the second one wouldn't be able to, because his story in many ways bound up with his race and with the race of his ancestors. So who's being discriminated there? I mean, these are conundrums that are posed. The exchange with the UNC lawyer, or the plaintiff's lawyer, Students for Affirmative Action, he said nothing stops UNC from honoring those who have overcome slavery or recognizing its past contribution. But the question is that a basis to make decisions about admissions of students who were born in 2003? And I don't think it necessarily is, he said. He said, I don't think that the Equal Protection Clause suggests that it is. So you're going to have, these things are going to be debated forever on the basis of the 14th Amendment. So I just think that race neutral alternatives. Coming up with race neutral alternatives is going to cause people to come up with challenges to that. That's why I think the middle ground might be either narrowing the scope of affirmative action or getting rid of it, or saying at the federal level, not taking a stance and kicking it back to the states. Just one way. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't think anyone knows after yesterday what it is or what it's going to be. On the Harvard side, remember, Alito was interesting, Justice Alito. On the UNC side, he said, well, I don't see any Asian Americans getting discriminated against, like he cares about us. But he did point out about Asian American applicants and the ratings there on the Harvard side. Students for fair admissions, that's the side that wants to end affirmative action. They allege that Harvard discriminates against Asian American applicants. And that claim hinges on the fact that, in general, such students receive lower ratings for their personal qualities. We talked about this in yesterday's live. Alito pressed the Harvard attorney, Waxman, for an explanation. And Waxman said that both a federal judge and an appellate court found no evidence of discrimination within Harvard's admissions process. And he downplayed the significance of personal ratings, which is true. I mean, I said this yesterday during the live, but, I don't see Alito's face. I hear but I can hear his voice and I can hear his reaction when Waxman says it doesn't make a statistical difference on whether or not there's any harm. And then Alito said, if it doesn't matter, why do you do it? Why do you have these personal ratings? Which is a good point, but I just recall when I heard them say that these personal ratings don't make a difference, they weren't discriminatory, but they do further an idea of a stereotype that comes out. And that would be a negative. So anyway, those are some general impressions I had about the hearings. Once again, the piece I wrote for the Inquirer.net, I pretty much I talked about my experience. They don't talk about affirmative action. I mean, affirmative action is a phrase that people bandy about, but admissions people don't like to use that phrase. I remember asking point blank. I said, am I an affirmative action candidate? And this is years after I got in. But a Harvard admissions officer, when I asked them, they said, no, the issue in your case, Emil, is what you overcame. And that came up in part in the hearings yesterday, and then it was dropped. It didn't. When I was listening to it, the idea of what you overcame matters. And for Asian Americans, it's, did you overcome your immigration status? Did you overcome your, in my case, my father's colonized American national status? I mean, he immigrated in the 20s. But what he faced was every bit as bad as what blacks face in the Jim Crow South. Couldn't own land, couldn't vote, couldn't intermarry. He could be shot for being with a white woman. He could work in the fields for $1 a day, or as my dad did, he worked in restaurants as a cook. Now that, to me, or for me, was my Everest. I overcame that. That was in my college essay. And for a lot of kids, this is the fear that if you get rid of affirmative action, if you get rid of race conscious admissions, you won't be able to tell your basic story, the story of your life. And then you become less of a person, less of an Asian American. You just become what? A number? You become a little more human, a little more humanized bit of artificial intelligence. I think that's the question of what happens. I think a lot of people, instead of trying to figure out what's going to happen with SCOTUS, they're just jumping ahead, saying, okay, look, conservative court, they're going to either diminish affirmative action or get rid of it. So what do? How do we assert our Filipino-ness? How do we assert our Asian Americanness when it is denied us? That's going to be the question. And probably another lawsuit. Unfortunately, I mean, they've been discussing affirmative action in court since the 60s, early 70s, since the Bakke decision, since Grutter and Bollinger, since the Fisher cases, since on and on. And that brings us back to Sandra Day O'Connor saying, oh, 2025, it'll all be over, right? I don't know. I think the litigation continues. So it's interesting that yesterday it was like top of mind, and now people are sort of going back, looking at the transcripts, trying to figure out, well, what does it mean? Really, what does it mean? What will it mean? And we won't see a decision until, I guess, sometime 2023. I mean, I think it's going to be tense. It's going to continue. We'll continue to see the world as it is. You know, I think that Harvard's still going to admit probably close to 25-30% Asian Americans in the freshman class next year. That's funny. That maybe the day that the ruling comes out sometime in 2023 is the day that Harvard announces, oh, the next incoming class is 25% Asian American, making Harvard itself 25% Asian American. All 4 years. All of Harvard College, which is really strange because when I got in, I think the Asian American numbers in the 70s were like, what, less than 5%? Ridiculous numbers. You can just point to that and say, look at how things have changed for Asian Americans. Going from less than 5% to 25% of the entire school. And yet, here's the thing. I've always said that if you want to say anything substantively about the impact or the effect or how good affirmative action is, it's not just about letting people in. It's about what kind of support do you give people once they get let in? How do you make people feel comfortable, welcome, and not isolated and not othered and differented? different, not othered. Because I have to admit, I have seen what happened to me in affirmative action, or in what happened when I was admitted to an elite school. I've seen other people complain to this day, 40 years later. Hasn't been better. I know. Another lawsuit, once they figure out how to deal with the admissions, then they deal with the discriminatory nature of the program once it's installed and what responsibilities an institution has. Just a question. I know I haven't even got into the Civil War aspect of how this breaks apart Asian Americans. And that's significant. And I'll get to that another day, because I think we have some time to think about what this means and how to deal with this and how to negotiate a world where affirmative action is hanging on a thread. Because Lord knows we still need a sense of diversity. We still need something to make sure we get the diversity we deserve in higher ed, in public hiring, and any kind of private hiring for that matter. How do we assure a sense of fairness in a society that's becoming more and more diverse, less white? We know that from the last census. So how do we get that perfect world where the world we see reflects truly the America we have become? So look, I guess we'll do more lives from wherever we are, since I know we can do it. But it sounds better. I have more control when I can go live from my little closet here. We'll continue to watch the news, continue to watch the things that are happening around the country. Just looking at the Washington Post, the main section here. Supreme Court clears way for Senator Graham to testify in Georgia election probe. That ought to make people think about, do we vote for the Republicans here? Bonnie Willis wants Lindsey Graham to testify before a grand jury about calls he made to Georgia election officials as President Donald Trump was contesting the 2020 election results. I'm telling you, everything hinges on the legitimacy of the 2020 election. If you feel it was legitimate, good. Those are the people to vote for. The people who feel it was illegitimate, the people who were like conspiring to do something to kind of to impact that election, those are the Republicans to run away from. Another headline, Chief Justice Roberts temporarily delays release of Trump tax records. Oh, well, a boost to Trump, who just wants to run out the clock. Shame on Justice Roberts. And pretty much people are just looking at, I guess the big news, if you saw it, the person who claimed that Herschel Walker in Georgia paid her money to have an abortion, not have a child, she's come out now. It looked like she was on ABC, and looked like Gloria Allred was her attorney, which means woman has a claim. And can you imagine? People are still thinking about voting for Herschel Walker. All right, we're going to end it here. Thank you for joining me. All right, maybe I hope I made some sense today. I'm not saying I'm the authority. I'm saying as a news person, as a person who has talked about the news, I might give you some direction how to think, what to think about some of these things that you've seen. Just another voice. Another voice. We're here Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific live, talking about, as I like to say, all things considerable. Hey, read my columns on the ALDEF blog, Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, aaldef.org/blog. Also at Inquirer, usa.inquirer.net, usa.inquirer.net. It's the website for the Filipino diaspora. Check out my columns there. Also, check out these broadcasts on amok.com. Also on Facebook, Emil, on facebook.com/EmilGuillermo.media, and on our YouTube channel. Regular listeners to the show know that I like a little bit of meditation. A little bit of meditation in the end. Because in the end, there's always self-doubt and self-worth, and you're maybe a little too unkind to yourself. You're harsh. The trick I've discovered, loving self-kindness, which doubles if instead of bringing that loving self-kindness toward yourself, you offer it to others, especially people you don't love, you don't like. That's the test. Offer it out there. And then you'll see that more often than not, it comes back twofold, threefold, however many folds you want in return. It does. It does. And so, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Emil Guillermo here. Till next time. Mahal Kita.